another edition of the Mistake-Free Real Estate Podcast. Today, all of you investors and landlords out there, and some of you investors that are just completely passive, you need to pay attention. Today, I've got my personal real estate attorney that helps me stay out of jail and keeps all of my tenants as happy as they can possibly be. But we want to make sure that Julie Anderson gets her words out today. I'm so super excited to present Julie Anderson. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
Julie's the managing partner at Anderson Associates. And look, she's got this whole big diatribe that I could go into. But Julie, at the end of the day, you are who I rely on to help me stay straight with all of this landlord-tenant law going on, because the world has changed since COVID, correct?
Yes.
How would you define what you do?
So I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. I predominantly practice here in the Kansas City area, including about 7 counties around the city. And I represent real estate investors. And when people say, what do you do? I'm in the business of keeping real estate investors in business. So we have a number of departments. We've got a transactional department that's working on title issues and real estate transactions as both commercial and residential properties are moving. We've got an eviction department, a bankruptcy, asset protection recovery department, and then more popular than ever, collections and litigation. So we are defending real estate investors more than we've ever defended them before, as long as bringing forward civil lawsuits on their behalf.
So COVID changed the world, right? Clearly. But in your world of real estate, what materially changed in the way that you're doing business?
Well, I mean, for our practice, obviously, you know, we shut down and we're interacting with all these different court systems. Multiple states, multiple jurisdictions, multiple judges with their different proclivities, their different health issues. We started seeing just flying administrative orders. A lot of the governors all over the country have been handing down decisions over time that were kind of politically following the gubernatorial caucuses, meaning if it was a Democratic governor, we're seeing the same orders, which was very strange in the state of Kansas because we had the same orders in Kansas that we did in California and Oregon and New York. So for an attorney in Kansas to have to talk to an attorney in California, it's just mind-blowing. While in Missouri, we had completely different orders, and each judge and each presiding judge had their own position. We've had judges take the position that we'll only do in person. We've had a lot of civil unrest regarding our evictions, and all of our court systems have shut down. I mean, we're back at phase 1, they call it now, in 2 counties again. So it's sort of, we are in a rush to start, just to take about 5 steps back all the time. On behalf of some investors, I think we've worked through a lot of our problems, but to be honest, there are still investors that are very much hurting.
For sure. So let's talk about that. What is the timeline now? Give us a worst case scenario of what you've seen out there as far as a tenant not paying rent and staying in the house for an extended period of time. What are you seeing on the street?
I mean, the worst case scenario, I mean, we still have one investor who just has a solo home in Missouri. He's 20 months with no income. We had an investor who owned a multifamily complex where there was a tenant union, a rent strike. So regardless of whether anybody had the ability to pay or was impacted by COVID-19, it was kind of irrelevant. They all went on rent strike, and if we couldn't access the courts for a period of time, there was really no relief for those investors.
And now I know that there are some agencies that are providing relief for tenants that is actually getting money to landlords. Like you've successfully recovered a bunch of funds. Who are these relief agencies, and what are you starting to see as far as the rent trickling through to your client landlords?
So we're seeing more rent relief checks coming now than we ever have before. I think one of the worst parts of what's happened is that landlords couldn't do anything to help themselves. Tenants have to take the affirmative step to apply. Not a landlord can do it on, like, just say my tenant should qualify, I should get rent. And I think that's why that's the biggest kink in the system, is that landlords can't do anything to help themselves unless their tenant cooperates. So the tenant has to apply.
That is still the case?
Correct.
Okay.
There is no program that I'm aware of, not in these 2 states, where a landlord can get relief without the assistance of the tenant, without the cooperation. We are seeing a lot of checks right now. which is great. I mean, we've been waiting a really long time. We've been, we're over a year and a half in now for some people, and we're seeing huge checks.
Yeah, I got one the other day.
$30,000, $40,000.
Yeah, no, I got one the other day on one of my rental properties. Apparently the tenant, again, I'm lucky to have a great team and I don't spend too much time dwelling on it, but I saw a $10,000 check come in and it was for 6 months in arrears and then 3 months in advance. So it looks like they're actually prepaying some of that. Is that what's happening?
Along with the landlord's agreement not to evict for the upcoming quarter of a year, they'll prepay the rent.
Fantastic.
Which is fantastic. But I will say, for those landlords that have tenants that are not cooperating, they really need legal advice. I had at one point in time over 200 CDC declarations, and we can get into what that means. But 200 clients struggling, and I think we're down now a handful.
Okay, so CDC. So the government stepped in, and let's start. Who officially put the eviction moratorium in place? Was it the federal government, or was it the actual White House, or was it the CDC?
So, I mean, there are about 5 different moratoriums that have all been interplaying with each other since March of last year. The first one was the CARES Act, and the CARES Act was the one that handed down all the money, the PPP. So everybody was excited about it. However, it was meant to be an economic stimulus bill. It came with clause for real estate investors, and that is if you had a federally backed mortgage, which almost every multifamily complex does.
Yeah.
The single family, not as much, just the solo investor out there, not as much, but then you could not evict. There was a complete moratorium on any complex with a federally backed mortgage. You could not, you had to send a special 30-day notice. That the CARES Act is still in place. So if you have a federally backed mortgage, you still have to send a 30-day notice. You can't just evict somebody, with a 3-day or just immediately. So that was kind of a double-edged sword, and that was the first one we saw in March of last year. Then HUD came in and said, no. If you have a single-family home with a HUD mortgage or any type of enterprise-backed single-family mortgage, you also can't evict. That's still in place. Then President Trump in September said, hey, CDC, do something. I personally think this had a lot to do with his reelection. It was not a good time to have millions of people all over the country, particularly in densely populated areas, on the streets homeless. Said, hey, CDC, on behalf of the national health, the health and welfare of our country, put in place an eviction moratorium. That was supposed to expire last year. It's now been extended a number of times. It's a really hot topic. As the Supreme Court has said, the CDC does not have that kind of authority. Our current president has said, I don't care. It's really crazy. We've never seen, or to my knowledge, we've never seen a president of the United States say, hey, Supreme Court, bite it. I don't really care what you say. But that's where we are now. And so we're back under the CDC moratorium until October. We had 48 hours without that. I probably filed well over 100 cases in 48 hours. So I'm pushing some things forward.
Well, one thing you told me all the way through was, Mark, tell your team, don't stop filing.
No.
You got to keep filing, right? And by the way, for those watching in, please watch to the end. Julie's going to give 8 top tips for those people that are, wondering what to do next. So keep watching to the end. We're going to come through with some top tips.
I really don't want people. One thing that I've been telling investors the entire time is do not become a victim. The victim mentality is holding back the success of investors. And I think we see that more with small investors than those that had some savings behind them, that had a growth mentality, that had a flexible mentality. So I talk a lot about the discipline of success when I talk to investors, saying, the true discipline of success in real estate investment is to face the reality that you're in. Just don't hide from it. Don't dig a hole and put your head in it. Face the reality. You've got to continue to change. And some of that is, of course, you've got to take care of your own health, and your safety, and your family, and your employees, and your own infrastructures. And then you've got to get educated. Come to a seminar, listen to someone, get on a podcast, What's going on? What is the CDC moratorium? Why does this matter to me? What are my rights? What can I do? What can't I do? What's available to me? You know, I'm constantly writing and blogging on our website, which is mokslaw.com. And I probably have 35 resources for tenant relief. We're trying to get money into the pockets of investors. That's really why we're here. And then I think there's just been a lot of strange guilt from investors, especially the smaller, not as much the larger, but, you know, good cash flow really matters. And I see it's good to be charitable in the beginning, but I think that if you're just going to sit and say, I'm not going to file any evictions, I'm just going to be a victim, poor me, I'm not getting paid, I'm not doing anything about it. You know, having good cash flow means your sustainability in business. And so, you know, I'm saying keep your eye on the ball. You've got to keep that good cash flow. You've got to keep that money coming in, know what kind of relief is available to you. And then probably more than ever, I'm talking about asset protection. People are pretty crazy. They're under stress. They're under pressure. There's been a lot of political unrest right now. And a lot of those people that are behind the most stressed, the most pressure, are the people that are living in rental properties. They aren't people that have so significant amount, you know, they don't have significant savings. They don't own their own homes. They aren't living in a comfortable investment position. The most stressed and pressured people right now are probably the poorest people in our communities, and they're living in your properties. And so wouldn't it be great if they could slip, trip, cut, and sue you? Because in the eyes of the world, and truly, I mean, definitely in this country, they think a real estate investor has the assets. You have the hard asset of real estate, so you must be wealthy, which is a huge misnomer, and I talk about this a lot. You know, not every real estate investor is, you know, super wealthy, but you are a target right now. So for the investors that are out there owning their properties in their own individual names, and even worse, when they're like, I put my wife's name on it, she's so happy. I mean, that is literally financial suicide. You have chosen to expose your entire future. I always say who you marry, yeah, it matters, but you can get a divorce and the courts will come in and take a snapshot of your financial situation at that time. But who you go into business with, those judgments will carry with you into perpetuity. And I'm a debt collector, and I'm going to be here for a while. And I'm telling you, like, I work with other lawyers on collecting judgments. And so the worst thing you can do right now is to be so naive to think that I don't care about asset protection, or I'm just going to give away rent and deal with it later. You just can't do that. You've got to have sufficient insurance. You've got to watch out for yourself. And so, you know, I have this saying, like, success is, in these circumstances, largely based on your discipline to confront your reality. Just the reality that tenants aren't paying rent. Tenants are misbehaving. People are more likely to sue you. I'm a foreclosure attorney by nature. Like, that is my background. I represented Freddie Fannie. I foreclose, evict, repossess, and bankrupt companies and individuals. That's just the kind of lawyer that I am. But you got to deal with it. You know, that could be coming for you as a real estate investor, another attorney. Not me who's protecting investors, but there are plenty of lawyers right now looking to sue them. So I really want investors to be thinking right now, what can I do to protect myself? And a lot of that has to do with, you've got to have the discipline to look at the reality of your situation, your cash flow, and confront it head on. You just cannot forgive rent, ignore rent, not carry sufficient insurance, not protect yourself, not educate yourself as to what's going on and why it matters and what it means for you. You just can't have faith. I think in the past, my clients kind of had this blind faith, like, I have an asset. You know, I send out a receipt or an invoice and then my tenant pays me. And, you know, sometimes I call them. Those days are over. It is just frankly over.
I love that perspective. I think too many investors out there are those, call them mom and pop. I don't know if that's the right term, but just a small one-off landlord. And the victim card, he may even be playing that card unbeknownst to himself. He thinks he's being nice and gratuitous and philanthropic even, when really he's being foolish and putting his livelihood in danger.
Well, and what is also happening is because we have had a lot of political unrest, the smaller landlord that doesn't come in with the depth of processes and procedures and tenant screening criteria, they're making judgments based on their emotions. And so they're saying, oh, this single mother came to me and I feel really bad for her, or she goes to my church and I feel bad, and so I'm going to help her out. But an African American who screamed in my face, I'm going to evict him, or I'm not going to give him the same, or I really like people from my own church, but not from another church. Never in my life would I ever say this, but I have more HUD complaints on my desk now than I do foreclosures.
HUD complaint. So when you say HUD complaints, what do you mean by that?
Meaning
discrimination.
People who have said my landlord's discriminating against me.
Wow.
More discrimination defense, which is not my specialty. Well, it is now, but would not have been my specialty. You know, I'm a foreclosure attorney. You pay, you stay, you don't, you go. It's that simple. You know, in historically my practice. And now it's much blurrier. You've got to understand and educate yourself on fair housing, processes and procedures, and regardless of how you feel about your tenant or their personal situation, you cannot take that into consideration. And if you have to say, my lawyer told me I couldn't, fine, blame me.
Yeah.
I'm not that popular.
So you're a huge proponent of third-party property management companies, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, if people can do it on their own and they have that kind of discipline, if you hear me, success in these circumstances is based on discipline, largely based on the discipline for you to confront your situation, educate yourself, and deal with it in the face of what it is. But I don't know that many investors that want to work that hard.
Right.
To come up with that.
And it is hard work. I mean, the scraping and screening tenants in and of itself, let's call that out. I mean, that's one of the biggest flaws, of any landlord-tenant relationship, is the fact that they shouldn't be a relationship in the first place. You should never have rented to them.
No.
That's one of the biggest things that, they moved in and they didn't pay in month 1. Who are we blaming here? The tenant or the guy that was meant to be screening?
I know. I mean, I keep saying to people, screening is so important, especially now for economically stable income and having good written screening criteria. Because as I've had clients who are great people. I mean, they're really empathetic people, which is wonderful for them in their own community, in their own church, in their own family. Good for you. I'm sure your spouse is happy.
Yeah.
But I don't know how you're going to run a professional business, and the first time somebody says, you discriminated against me because I'm this race, this sex, this disability. A lot of times my clients don't even know that they are disabled or don't know that they are a certain religion. Doesn't matter. I have to get into your documents, and I'm going to look at your documents. First, I'm going to look at your tenant screening criteria. I hope you have some, because when you don't, now I'm going to have to use what I think is HUD screening criteria and apply it to the facts of your rental history. And it's not going to look good.
Yeah.
If you felt bad for people and you treated people differently. And as harsh as it is, I think third-party management companies don't have the emotional.
No, well, and you helped.
The tenant's not going to call you and cry to you, and you're going to do something.
But
not
also,
now.
We have gone through the process. I mean, albeit probably, I think it was 8 or 9 years ago. Again, Julie and I have been working together for, I was going to say a decade, but I think it's been longer than that now. But I think 8 or 9 years ago, we actually sat down and went through the process of you reviewing our lease agreement, reviewing our tenant practices. And so that's the level of engagement that your attorney really should have. And if you don't, then you need to go and find someone who can get to that level of engagement, because that's really helped us out, was just understanding the process that we should be going through. And you coming in with a microscope and looking at our lease agreement, saying you're missing this clause and this paragraph and this section, and don't say this and say this, and just cleaned everything up, was a big help for us.
And cleaning up your internal notes. No notes is actually worse than bad notes, and just having an impartial third party is so incredibly important.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not emotional about tenants' needs. I have fallen for it when I was young, and I am over it. But, we're empathetic as people, but I'm not going to compromise the process and procedure of any company because I have empathy towards a specific individual. Won't do it. because that's exactly how you're going to get a discrimination lawsuit.
For sure. Are you seeing more tenant representation through attorneys than before? Because I remember back in the day when you and I would show up, I mean, it's, dating back 12, 13 years, but we'd show up and there'd be no one there. It'd be default judgment in our favor. I'm assuming those days are...
It's all gone.
All gone. Okay.
These courthouses are full of tenant advocates. And I can say this. In some ways, it's not horrible. Right now, I appreciate legal aid. There's a number of foundations. UMKC right now, they're hiring lawyers like crazy, young lawyers. Some of them are crusaders that don't make a lot of sense, but a lot of them want to help the tenant pay their rent and stay, which is great for the investor, because right now, having an economically stable business sounds fantastic. If you don't have to rely on the government for PPP, you don't have to rely on just the hopes and whims of your tenant's application. They'll fill the application out for the tenant. And that's a huge challenge for us. I'm not equipped to help tenants who don't speak English fill out applications, who don't have sufficient documentation in order to support their applications. But there are now groups of lawyers who are. Now, of course, this comes as a double-edged sword. I can say it's great there are all these lawyers. They're working on grant money right now. It's all coming largely through that economic stimulus bill, the CARES Act.
Yep.
Also, unfortunately, I think a lot of rent relief money in certain cities has been put into tenant services, which would mean attorneys for tenants. It means that you're going to have more jury trials, more legal expenses. What used to be very easy for us, no problem, I could do 100 of, now we're struggling to do 25 of.
Yeah, and for clarity for the audience that wouldn't know the process, it used to be where if we showed up and the tenant didn't, it would just be a default judgment. You just win. And you get judgment, there's always two judgments that you get. You get the judgment for possession, and they get judgment for rent and back rent. Mm-hmm. So now that they're lawyering up, what percentage? It used to be maybe 15% that would show up with an attorney. Now it's
75, 80%.
Wow.
Right
so
now,
is
depending on the courthouse, there are attorneys available to you for free in the hallway.
Wow. In the hallway. Okay. Yes. So just waiting outside.
Just waiting outside to help you keep your home. Which, I've taken some argument too in that lawyers are not permitted to solicit business. Like, we can't stand outside of an emergency room and everybody who comes in we give our card to. That's been highly discouraged as a profession. But interestingly, because now it's kind of socially popular, we are able to do that. And I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I think early on I was. I found it to be a bit disruptive, along with all the demonstrations, the political demonstrations. We have had blood thrown, and people are chaining themselves to the doors of the courthouse and screaming that I'm a murderer because I evict people. At that time, we could not evict people for non-payment. These were all people that were behaving poorly. And the courts were stressed, particularly in the more densely populated communities. So, yes, the reality is that when you have tenants who are not acting properly or are not paying you, which I consider to be not acting properly, this is a contract.
Mm-hmm.
You agree to provide them with an asset that's habitable, which means you have a lot of obligations and duties to keep it habitable, maintain it, respond to your tenants' complaints, while they have an obligation to pay you and to behave appropriately. And so there can be a breach on either side. We did see for a period of time a lot of frivolous counterclaims. So legal aid has a form that they give tenants, and you can just check any box or no box, which I thought was funny. They weren't even able to fill out the counterclaim. They would just file it. So we had some issues. How am I going to defend you when you're not telling me unknown things wrong? But that definitely is increasing the legal expenses for landlords. But you've got to defend yourself. And those landlords that are going in by themselves, and I've seen a number, they're getting emotional.
Yeah.
Because they're being attacked.
And he's saying this is not fair, which is the worst,
The courts do not care about your it's not fair argument. Yep. They don't care about the tenants, it's not fair argument, or the landlords, it's not fair argument. It's not fair is not a legal defense or a legal theory. You must find a statutory theory and move forward with it. or a statutory defense and move forward with that.
Yeah.
Which is where the attorneys are coming in, and they're raising a lot of statutory defenses against landlords. Some of them are justified, some of them are not. But it's messy out there. It's messier than it's ever been.
You mentioned the term creative lawyering. You want to kind of tell a little bit about what you mean by that?
I mean, I think we're seeing more creative lawyering on every side. One, there's no precedent. So there's not like, oh, let me go to the case law from the last pandemic and say, well, this is authoritative to you, Your Honor. So we're seeing judges come forward with their own kind of proclivities. You know, I have a conservative judge, I have a liberal judge. And so how I'm trying cases to each type of judge, or, you know, some judges don't like certain things. Some like a long, verbose legalese. Some are just like, get to the point. Some don't even want to hear me speak. I just nod and push paper at them. Others want to hear me do long opening arguments. They want to hear me talk about the Supreme Court and what they're saying and the administration and the history of the law and why I don't think it should apply to this case. It just depends. But I think we're seeing creative lawyering more on the defense. Part of that is we see all this grant money. So some of it's rent relief, some of it's federal money coming into the cities or the counties, and they're hiring free lawyers. So lawyers that are in law school, recently out of law school, that are being paid on a grant basis. So this is not a lot of money. So you have to feel passionate about the cause of free housing, accessible housing, tenant rights. So they're coming in with quite a bit of emotion on the defense side. On our side, we're just predominantly annoyed that, you know, like I had to get out of my jammies, come down to this dirty courthouse and argue with this person who's on the brink of tears about their tenants' rights. But we're seeing new causes of action. We're seeing them use defenses differently, very liberally. Terms like habitability, you know, what used to be habitable and what they're saying is uninhabitable now. It's just, it will blow your mind. You know, there was a window that didn't latch. They didn't tell the landlord about it, and so we had to have an 1.5 hour hearing about how uninhabitable an unlatched window would be, which 2 years ago, I would have laughed in their face. I don't care. Did you put in a work order? You did not. I object. Irrelevant. You cannot raise that defense.
And now
I have to have an 1.5 hour argument and closing arguments about an unlatched window, which kind of brings us back to third-party property management companies or my clients who are doing it themselves. I have a lot of out-of-state clients, an incredible number of out-of-state clients who just, the old way of landlording was to just collect the rent, and if you had to hire a plumber, maybe you would, you know, in due course. But now, I mean, if you're not fixing a latched window, even that you didn't know about, you could be spending, you know, $600 in attorney's fees trying to defend you.
Yeah.
And depending on the court and where that court is and the proclivity of that judge, you might not like it, but you're going to have to deal with it.
No, I mean, look, the book I wrote, Mistake-Free Real Estate, hence the name of the podcast, is all about using a third-party property management and real estate investment firm to avoid the pitfalls and mistakes that rookie investors are making. And to your point, never, you know, in these times, there's so many, I mean, it's very, I use it to say, you know, don't make the mistake on the buy or the rehab or the management. But you know, one of the things that I should go back and write a whole nother chapter on is the legal side of things. Because what you're, you know, opening my mind to and making me realize is that just there's so many pitfalls that a rookie investor can fall into if they don't know what they're doing and if they're not following good procedures.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, my clients over the years they've overbuilt, made it too nice, or thought that Section 8 was a great idea because government will always pay me, but then you got to do the rehab again.
Yeah.
I've seen the mistakes on all ends, but the worst time you ever meet me is when you receive a complaint that you have discriminated and you have a conversation with me. And I mean, I don't have a lot of time to hear how unfair this is. I would say over the last 1.5 years, we've become a little bit insensitive. You know, in the beginning, I wanted to have empathy for investors, but guess what? This is the reality that you're in. I cannot change the reality. I do not work for the President of the United States. I do not work for the CDC. I do not work for the courts, and I do not work for the government. I am a private attorney, and I'm here to tell you your reality. And it doesn't look good because you didn't have processes and procedures, and you didn't follow them.
Yeah.
So now we have a couple of choices. We can try and settle. We can go through the discovery process where they're going to discover how discriminatory you look. But don't worry, I'm going to go through the discovery process before they do because I want to know what kind of case you have.
How bad is it? Yeah.
Right. And most of my clients are pretty honest. You know, when you're talking to a lawyer, it is confidential. That is one thing. We carry a lot of secrets deep down, and we should. But where I don't want to find out about those secrets is in open court or in a deposition that is recorded. Yeah. And I have a few times. There's a few clients out there, I doubt they're listening now, but they've been stabbed in the leg.
So, Julie, one of the things that I credit you with is, our team's done a wonderful job. And all through, March 2020, we had a gut check. I mean, we were like, okay, how is this going to impact our business? Our tenant's going to pay. We were scrambling, making sure we were doing everything possible. And we obviously consulted with you and what can we do? But you really helped and guide us through that. I mean, I'm proud to say that through all of this, we've maintained like 99% occupancy and 98.5% collection. I mean, tenants have been paying. And I think part of it for us was good communication with the tenants, offering up, fair resources to say, hey, look, we're waiving late fees. If you're paying credit card, those fees are whatever we can do to try and make it easier.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, just a reality check that, look, if you don't want to pay, you're in this bucket. But if you're ready, willing, and able, and at least have good intent that you're trying to do the right thing, we'll certainly work with you and get creative on that. I say a credit to you because the ones that were, and luckily for us, I mean, most of our tenants were screened well, had good jobs, good incomes, and there might have been a pause on their income, but for the most part, when the economy recovered, we did just fine. You were still able to get people out during that time period.
I've been very aggressive. So just really quickly, I'm going to go through what is the CDC order and what it means. A tenant has to come under oath, meaning I pledge to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God, under the penalty of perjury, that I've used my best efforts to obtain government assistance, Your Honor. I earn less than $99,000, and I'm unable to pay my rent because of a COVID-related matter. Like, I've lost substantial income. I've lost work hours. I have extraordinary out-of-pocket medical expenses. And I've been using my best efforts to make partial payments. I'm being the best tenant that I can be under the circumstances. I believe I'm going to become homeless if you evict me, and that I acknowledge that I'm going to have to pay rent eventually, but Your Honor, please take mercy on me. I'm saying this under penalty of perjury.
So there are 7 things there. They have to check all those boxes.
All 7.
Before they can get the stay of eviction in this moratorium. So everyone who just thought, the misnomer out there in the public, I think, is, hey, there's an eviction moratorium. You can't evict these people.
Of course. Well, the news really pushed that.
Yep.
But that is the truth of what the CDC said. They said these people who raise these defenses should be protected from non-payment lawsuits. But what the CDC order is not, is it doesn't say you can become a criminal. It doesn't mean you can use drugs. It doesn't mean you can lie, cheat, steal, stay, move in all your friends from jail. Last year, I had more crime. I have a very strategic relationship now with the police department that I didn't necessarily have before, and that we've never seen so much crime. They kind of opened up the jails in the city and said, go home, go to your home.
Or someone else's.
You don't have a home. You don't have a mortgage. You do not own a home. You've been in jail for a year. Where are you going? You're going to a multifamily housing complex where your buddy lives.
Yeah.
And because of COVID, and I understand everybody was freaking out. I don't want to take urine samples. I don't want to take blood samples. I don't want to take bodily fluids to test people for drugs or alcohol while they're out on parole. So we're doing no drug testing and we just open up our jails. Okay, they're going to flood into the multifamily housing complexes. So we saw just a huge uptick in behavioral issues, especially the more closely people were living together.
So you filed on those issues rather than, so that's what you used to get the people out when needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, if you're going to behave poorly, like I said, this is a contract. Landlords have an obligation, and I had a lot of landlords call me and say, it's unfair, they're not paying me, how am I supposed to pay my mortgage, and how am I supposed to pay my insurance, and how am I ever going to maintain the property? It's just not fair. Don't care. It's not fair. Here's the reality of your situation. You have a contractual obligation to do it, and you must do it. And I will do everything that I can to make sure that they have to do what they're supposed to do, and that is pay you and not behave poorly.
Yep.
And so we looked at behavior. A lot of tenants who were taking advantage of the system were behaving poorly. And then I started challenging. I was one of the first lawyers who said, okay, the CDC order does not address the right to challenge, but I personally believe that due process would call for a procedure for me to cross-examine someone who makes a statement under oath to a court.
To validate the... the validity of that claim.
Sure. Different judges have felt very differently about my approach. I can say with certainty some of them were not a big fan. So the CDC didn't say, the president didn't say, everybody lives for free. If they said that, then the government, that's called a taking. They're taking your property. What they said is there's a health crisis issue. There's a crisis. And so we're going to allow people to pay later if they meet these 7 criteria. They have to file a written declaration. They have to do it under the penalty of perjury. They have to meet these 5 criteria. So why couldn't I say, but you don't? You don't meet those criteria. And hopefully no judges are listening to this. I know who you are. You know I know. Some said, no, I'm not going to allow you to challenge. If they file the declaration. Also, a lot of tenants struggle with paperwork, which is why in some ways I kind of like legal aid, because they fill the paperwork out for them. But if they filed some sort of declaration that was just empty, or they didn't sign it, or they couldn't read it, I should have the right on its face to challenge those. And then a lot of cases, I had evidence. If you're a good landlord and you're in contact with your tenants and you know what's going on in your property, or you've hired a professional property management company that's going by, knocking on the door, taking pictures, going in, doing regular inspections with 24-hour notices, you have enough information to tell me either they're violating the lease because of their behavior, or maybe they're great tenants, but we know they just bought a boat, they just got back from vacation, they've been working at the hospital in a medically necessary job, and they just filed the declaration because they thought it was cool to live for free. Well, I'm going to challenge that. And I've had some success.
A lot? Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to say I've had a lot. Everything is based on the evidence that's before me.
Yeah.
So if you have great evidence for me, you do great reconnaissance, you know your tenant's employed, I can verify employment, I can show.
Well, and maybe that's why it feels like a lot of success for us, because we have our ducks in a row and we know we have the inspections that happen on a regular basis. Again, third-party management protects a lot of the downside from owning real estate.
Absolutely. If you're a New York investor or a California investor, which is great, a lot of people, I understand why you're in these big places and you want to invest here. I mean, you can buy 7 properties for the price of, 1 corner of a property there. However, if you're going to be an absentee landlord, you can't get me the evidence that I need, and if you won't travel here. So some judges, particularly in our smaller communities, our counties, such as Clay or Cass, which are kind of the more rural counties, they said no remote hearings, in person the whole time.
Oh, wow.
So if you're a California investor and I need a witness and you're not willing to get on a plane because of COVID and come here and meet me in the middle of the country, where I don't want to be either, I had to get out of my jammies and my suit jacket and go and drive there. But if that's what the judge says, we serve at the pleasure of the court. If you want to file a lawsuit, you serve at the pleasure of that judge.
One of the things that I get asked a lot about, just pivoting for a minute, is the shadow wave of foreclosures. So you're primarily a foreclosure attorney, at least that's your background. What are your thoughts on the ramifications of the tenants not paying the owners not paying the mortgage company? Is there a shadow have foreclosures been happening through the process? And then secondarily, what do you see is there a backload or shadow inventory foreclosures that we should be worried about?
I mean, So yes, we have been foreclosing throughout on behalf of non-federally backed small private lenders.
Yep, local banks or whatever.
Local banks have been doing some, depending on whether or not they're community banks. I can definitely say we've had some hard money lenders. Definitely, I've been encouraging them, like, if your investor's not paying you, they're in a bad place, you're in a bad place. Take the property back and make it income producing.
Yep.
You know, try and work with your investor who took out the loan, but if they're not managing the asset appropriately, then let's foreclose. So yes, we've had foreclosures. They have been moving forward. There was a short period of time, I think for almost 3 months, that we were not, but that was, a year ago. So do I think there's going to be a huge wave of foreclosures? Absolutely. I mean, all the major lenders, I don't think it's going to happen this year. I truly believe if I had been on this podcast before the last extension, I mean, the Supreme Court of the United States said the CDC has no authority without an act of Congress. Congress said we won't act, and then they extended the moratorium again. So we're in this completely uncharted territory right now. I think that they're going to kick this can as far as they can. What kind of teeth does the Supreme Court of the United States have? I don't know. I would have thought, I'm a lawyer. I would have thought when the Supreme Court says no, that means everybody falls in the line and says, I would have been like, no. But I guess that's not where we are.
Yeah.
The last few administrations have been very challenging to authority and to the various branches.
So this wave will simply be when federal mortgages cannot go through the regular process of foreclosure. They're basically getting backlogged. And in the same way that some, landlords are not getting their rent, there are some mortgage companies that are not getting their house payments, their mortgage payments. And as soon as they're able to, there will be a wave of foreclosures coming. And will that coincide?
There's no way there will not be.
So will that coincide?
Does another bailout.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if we're going to do another...
Yeah, restaurant owners got it, so could property owners get it, right? That would be the next thing.
It's possible. I can definitely say those investors that have been making the conservative decision to pay their mortgages, which I have been encouraging them to do, either work out a repayment plan, because your credit... Your individual owner's credit, your member's credit, your manager's credit matters. I don't know if you use credit to leverage on your investments, but I'm definitely encouraging my clients, don't trash your credit. Don't be that short-sighted. I mean, we could be looking 5-7 years down the road, and you want to buy a great investment. You don't know where this industry is going.
Yeah, for sure.
And now with, the real estate market has been pretty hot. It's going for higher than, it's been interesting to watch. Properties are selling for high.
No doubt. Okay, are you ready to give your 8 top tips?
Sure.
Okay, so this section of the program is brought to you by 1-800-SELL-NOW. If any of you landlords out there are looking for a fast, efficient, friendly way to sell your property, if you've got a problem property, such as what Julie's been talking about today, where the tenant's not paying, or you have a vacant property, abandoned, needs repair, you don't have the money, in any of these situations, if you just want to rid yourself of the hassle of the landlord experience, call 1-800-SELL-NOW, and they will be able to solve that problem for you. Okay, Julie, let's give all of these guys here that are listening just some top tips. What are 8 key takeaways that could help people solve their real estate burden?
Sure. My first tip is that communication with your tenants is key. I have a saying in my company, and I say communication's the first casualty of all relationships. If you think about it, do you have a communication issue with your spouse, with your children? With your coworkers, with your boss? Absolutely. Communication now is so important. Historically, like I said, you just collect the rent, you put a tenant in the property, unless there's a problem, which even if historically, if you had a problem, you just send a plumber or an electrician and call it a day. You get your check, you don't talk to them. It's over. You got to talk to these people. You have to develop this relationship, and there's so many casualties as to how this communication works. And some of it's based on race or age differences, socioeconomic differences, but you've got to start communicating with your tenants, and it's just so key. My second is, I do not think you should wait to file an eviction. Landlords should continue to file, and the reason that I say that is I went from several hundred declarations to now just a handful. I have been able to resolve hundreds of cases with payments to landlords or with an order. You know, if you're filing sooner, we can deal with the issues and the losses sooner. Cut your losses. Let's work on a plan to cut your losses and get somebody in there who's actually has economically stable income, who actually has government subsidies, who's actually going to pay you, who's being honest. Or you can just act like a victim and just keep losing money every month and call me in 2 years and say, this is an emergency, I haven't had income in 2 years. What? Like, you need to continue to be an advocate for yourself and continue to file cases, or at least have a conversation with your lawyer, depending on your industry or what market you're in. 3, pay close attention to your tenant's behavior. This is part of communication, but you know, we can file a lot of cases based on lease violations. Historically, I was kind of like, they're not paying, we'll get them out. But now I'm saying, what is their behavior? Have they moved in unauthorized occupants? Have they opened the jail doors and moved into your property? That's a problem. You know, are they throwing drug parties for extra income on the side? I mean, has somebody stabbed someone, shot someone?
Managed by walking about, right?
Yeah,
Let's just go, you got to walk about, you got to check on their behavior.
Yeah, absolutely. And a systematic, we do quarterly inspections. Maybe you're going by to make sure that the furnace filters changed or the light bulbs, or just wellness checks, just that kind of process and procedure of monitoring behavior. Look at your asset. It's been kind of crazy to me. You know, like if I had a diamond ring, I'd want to check up on it. You know, if I had a pile of cash sitting in my drawer, I'd want to make sure it's there. A lot of people with real estate are just like, I haven't seen it in years.
Yeah, it's a $150,000 asset, but I hope it's okay.
Yeah, if you had a $150,000 diamond walking around on your wife's finger, you'd take a look. Go out and take a look. Let's see what's going on. Also, you've got to become a social worker if you want to get paid right now. And you've got to help these tenants fill out these applications. You've got to encourage them to do the right thing by you, do the right thing for themselves. Social work was not a skill that many property management companies had before. And some of my largest clients have had to almost bring in someone who does social work for them, that has that kind of, like, I would not be an eligible candidate for your social work department. I don't have that kind of sensitivity, but it all plays into communication. So I'm telling landlords, like, you have to landlord harder than you've ever landlorded before. Like, these are skills that you did not have and you need to have now. You know, the key to success is the discipline of facing the reality. And the reality is that if you want to get paid, you will become a social worker. You will start filling out government subsidy paperwork for your tenants, with your tenants. You will have to have the skills to convince them that they want to do that for themselves. There's so many barriers right now for why people do that. So it's kind of, my biggest tip is landlord harder than you've ever landlorded. I have a list of resources that's everyday changing at mokslaw.com.
Yeah, super valuable.
Which stands for Missouri, Kansas Law.com under tenant resources. And we're always throwing things up there. Next, screening new tenants for sufficient income and economically stable income. You know, before we were squeaking people through just to get our occupancy numbers up, maybe saying, oh yeah, maybe they have a job, a cash job on the side, and we just took their income, you know, whatever they filled out on the application. No, thank you. We're not doing that anymore. You've got to, it's just really, really important. Jobs,
verification of employment,
and verification of income is important.
Yep.
So screen. 7 is, things are really changing. So what I tell you today, what I told you 6 months ago, what I told you 18 months ago, what I told you 12 months ago, it's just always changing. Finding an attorney, not just, if you're in a really small industry, like maybe a lawyer does everything, but that's not really true of a bigger industry. You should not come to me for your will or trust. You should not come to me necessarily, about your personal injury. You should not come to me for your divorce. I represent real estate investors. That's all I do. So things are changing. It's really inconsistent. It matters who you're hiring. It matters who's advising you right now. It matters that you're staying current. And I mean, my 8th is that if you're unclear, you've got to go to a professional management company. You've got to go to a professional attorney, because what I was saying for 2 days, I mean, to file over 100 cases in 48 hours, what I was telling my clients on those days changed, drop of a dime. That's just the place that we're in. It's ever changing. You've got to face it. As things are changing, we're constantly blogging and writing and trying to, what I'm trying to do is not take emotional phone calls as much as saying, here's the information. In the face of reality, read it.
Yep.
Deal with it. And if you're disciplined, you will be successful through this. And I think that we've seen, when you're talking about your occupancy rates, your default rates, I have handfuls of clients who are really thriving. You being one of them, they're thriving through this, as opposed to cowering to it or saying it's not fair. Just getting that entire mentality out of the business. This is a business. And some people feel like, oh, I own an investment. Just like I said, if you owned a $120,000, $300,000 diamond, you put it on your wife's finger, you'd be watching that. And you've got to do the same with your real estate. You've got to watch it. You just can't let it go anymore.
Julie, this has been so impactful for me personally, and I appreciate you coming out here today. Nice to do a podcast live and in person. So for those of you listening, check it out on YouTube as well. Lots of gems. I love the discipline of success, facing the reality. I think that's a big takeaway for me. And then the 8 key points there: communication, don't wait to file, tenant behavior, focus on the rental assistance, screen your tenants, verify the jobs and income, collaborate, I think is a big one, and lawyer up. I think, one of the things that I've done well over the last few years and really focused on is collaboration over trying to DIY. And, having the best attorney, having the best accountant is pretty important. So for those that don't have a good lawyer representation and you are in the Kansas City area, obviously we'll have Julie's contact information on the show. Please go and visit mokslaw.com. And to your credit, those free tenant resources there for the tenants and the landlords are so valuable. We constantly just go and check those out. So thanks again for being on the show. It's been fun, guys. You've got a glimpse into the bulldog that is behind me, keeping me safe and secure. I get to sleep well at night knowing that Julie's on top of everything on my legal side of things. So till next time, again, mistakefreerealestate.com. Thanks again, Julie, for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
You're listening to Mistake-Free Real Estate Radio, the authority in passive real estate investing. No late-night calls, no clogged drains, no tenant nightmares. Take the passive investor's approach to real estate investing and trust a turnkey professional. Learn more at mistakefreerealestate.com. Until next time, remember, you don't get rich from what you earn, you get rich from what you own.